Welcome to my world history notes where I'm studying the Cold War and sharing things with you that I'm learning, things that I didn't know, some things I did, but a lot of things finding out for the first time. This is if this is your first video that you've seen, this is very superficial and skimming the surface. That names and places and concepts that I tell you. I hope that you'll dig further, even if it's to prove I'm wrong. I'm going to bring up some I always bring up some people that are significant, whether they be communist agents, Stalin agents, communist Chinese agents, or if they're the good guys who are fighting against these. Um, but I want to start today with a little discussion about a guy named John Stewart Service. Now, he was a U.S. State Department official, and he was a Foreign Service officer during World War II. He was caught red-handed by the FBI delivering the National Chinese Order of Battle to communist agent Philip Jaffe. Now, he was always portrayed as an innocent victim of McCarthyism, but later admitted that he had falsified intelligence on the communist Chinese because he wanted the communist Chinese to win. Now, in 1944, he was the second secretary of the U.S. Embassy in Chongqing, China. And there he shared a house with two communist agents, U.S. Treasury Attaché Solomon Adler and Chinese Ministry of Finance, excuse me, official Xi Jinping, um, which I've mentioned previously. I talked about in the last episode. So I want to talk a little bit more about John Stewart Service. Uh, he was one of the most important U.S. officials in China, and he was living and working with two case-hardened Soviet agents. Very important. Now he was the only one of the threesome, according to M. Stanton Evans, in his book about McCarthy, Blacklisted by History. He was only one of the threesome who later get much notice. Like several other what they called China hands, including his lifelong friend and fellow diplomat John Davies, he was the son of missionary parents. He was born in China, spent much of his life there, and was fluent in the language. He was a career Foreign Service officer. He worked on the U.S. Embassy staff at Chongqing with Counselor John Carter Vincent, who was later the head of the China desk and Far East Division at Staten, and would become, like Davies, a political advisor to General Joseph Vinegar Joe Stilwell, who was a wartime commander of the U.S. and Chinese forces in the region. And he did not like Stilwell did not like Chiang Kai-shek, who was fighting on our side. He called him names, called him the Peanut, and other insulting nicknames. Stilwell idealized the Chinese Reds, and he definitely was not on the side of the nationalists. Excuse me. So anyway, his attitude gave members of his staff free rein to be as hostile to our ally as they might wish. Now, by the late summer of '44, Service had landed a coveted spot as a U.S. observer at the Communist General Headquarters in far-off Yunnan, a posting for which he wanted to be put there. As in Chongqing, he would consort with Zhou Enlai, the foreign minister of the Reds, with he had access to Mao. In his assignment, Service would also commingle with journalists who made a pilgrimage to Yunnan, including famous journalist leftist Israel Epstein, Gunther Stein, and a fairly sizable crew of others. Now, so John Stewart Service had some tremendous impact on the way what Chiang Kai-shek was doing, what the nationalists were doing was reported, and what the Chinese communists weren't doing was being reported um, to support the Chinese communists. Now, how did this? What was the main way that they influenced um, our treatment of China? Uh, well, it was to constantly belittle Chiang Kai-shek, constantly belittle the nationalists, constantly talk up the communists. Uh, they were doing even though they weren't. They say the communists were doing the most of the fighting. The nationalists were weak and stupid. We had the same leftist um, stuff about the Republic of Vietnam's soldiers in a war. The leftist news media would always report them as being idiots and couldn't hold their own and ran in battle and stuff like that, which was not really true 100%. I mean, there was a lot of things they were exaggerating to make our ally look bad because they were supporting the communists. Now, here's how they did this. They did the same thing in Yugoslavia. Okay, it's a great effect. It works. So let me go over some of that with you before I go back to any timeline. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to talk about this Yugoslavia. The battle for post-war Yugoslavia pitted communist Josip Broz, who took the nickname of Tito, and you probably read about him, against the pro-Western Serbian general Draza Mihailovic, who he was right at the outset of the fighting. He was the anti-Nazi leadership in the Balkans. When Hitler attacked Yugoslavia in the spring of '41, the Belgrade government collapsed, and Mihailovic led a breakaway group of officers into the mountains to carry on a resistance. These guerrilla fighters, in the jargon of the war called Chetniks, were among a handful of forces in Europe then actively opposing Nazi power. And this would, for a while, be much admired in the United States and Britain. However, such anti-Nazi activities weren't at the time admired by Stalin, still observing his pact with Hitler. So he would continue to do as he would continue to do until his totalitarian partner double-crossed him when Hitler invaded in June of '41. He invaded Russia. What happened later? It was only after Hitler invaded Russia that Yugoslav communists led by Tito would join the fray against the Nazis, making it clear that their allegiance was to Moscow. This alignment against the Wehrmacht, the German army, would last for a year and a half after the Russo-German fighting started. And as all the Allies now looked with favor on the Chetniks, Tito, still assembling his own guerrilla forces. Now, Tito's communists would get the name partisan a little bit later. By late '42, as the Red Guerrillas began to come online, Mihailovic was no longer the only Balkan military leader in the field to oppose the Germans. And at this time, communist and pro-Soviet propaganda outlets suddenly began portraying him not as a gallant ally, but as a collaborator and traitor. The previously unheralded Tito would be acclaimed instead as the only Yugoslav commander carrying the fight against the Axis. So the press and the agents in our government began to pump up this formerly inactive communist leader and made him look like he was the one taking the fight to the Nazis. And Mihailovic would then be converted almost overnight from a freedom fighter to a pro-Nazi villain. By early 1943, the new message was being broadcast by a shortwave radio service called Radio Free Yugoslavia, which was based in Russia, and pro-red spokesmen in the West, demanding that the Allied support be denied the Chetniks and switch to the communist Tito. In the United States, this line was promoted by the writer Louis Adamic, who was a communist novelist, Howard Fast, and subsequently cited communist front called the American Slav Congress, which advocated a pro-red stance on issues of Eastern Europe. Aiding the pro-Tito cause in the United States was the fact that in these matters, the Americans played second fiddle to the British, who had long-standing interest in the region and were much better versed than we in the ways of secret warfare. There was also a British intelligence unit based in Cairo, which had influence on Yugoslav affairs, and they kept pumping up the communist forces and downplaying the anti-communist forces as being pro-Nazi. And you'll get even historians, you'll get people in history repeating lies, repeating propaganda as fact, and then you're reading it and you're going, oh, okay, this. So these reports had great impact on Allied policy in the regions. When you have Cairo intelligence, the British portraying the Yugoslav communists as heroic anti-Nazi fighters, while Mihailovic, in the broadcast from Russia, is derided as a collaborator and traitor, you got, it becomes more and more about what you're going to give, who you're going to give the money to, who you're going to give the guns to. Like some dispatches would say the partisans had 200,000 men, were tying down 20 to 30 Nazi divisions, and Mihailovic only had 10 or 20,000 men at his disposal, and which was a total baloney. That wasn't true. So finally, the British would conclude, the Foreign Office would conclude that Mihailovic wasn't effective at all, and he'd done nothing from a military point of view, so they cut him off. They cut off any support. This is a guy that originally was their hero. So the Yugoslav case parallels the events in China. One parallel was that accounts of valiant communist fighting in both countries were usually lies. Okay. So Tito, for a considerable period, sought a neutrality agreement with the Nazis, the very thing the Reds accused Mihailovich of doing. Likewise, contrary to tales of Tito's military prowess, the Nazis in May 1944 routed him from his headquarters and ran him out of the country. He would thus unheroically spend the rest of the war under the protection of the British and the Russians. Only when the Soviets rolled into Belgrade would he go there to stake his claim to power. Just like a parallel to um, the way we treated China. So you had um, we know now from all the KGB files and the investigations and intelligence from our intelligence agencies, British intelligence and information agencies in the war years were riddled with Soviet agents, communists, and their sympathizers, they call fellow travelers, who, among other things, made it a project to attack Mihailovich and build up Tito. And this is so much like what they did in China, and how China was undercut by the communist Soviets, the people in our government who were communist, the people in our news media who were pro-communist. And so this not only prolonged the Cold War, but it gave the enemy in the Cold War a tremendous start against us. So we'll stop there. I want to talk a little bit about next time, if I can, reading from the Black Book of Communism. I want to talk about, which was a study that several European scholars did about the crimes and excesses of the Soviet communists. And I want to talk about, well, Soviet and Chinese and other countries. But I want to talk about some of the things, the conditions that happened at the end of World War II to show you how the West had a hand in prolonging the oppression of this communist in Soviet Union and communist China, that they enacted on people. So we'll stop there, but it's very interesting stuff. I hope you'll dig into it yourself. Thank you.